Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining us. Today we have an excellent talk. We're going to get started with really excited to introduce our speaker for today. We're going to be talking about the SEC cybersecurity ruling and how it ties into application security and incident response. So I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today. His name is Kevin Beaver. He is an independent information security consultant and professional speaker, writer, and expert witness with Atlanta, Georgia-based Principal Logic. Kevin has over 35 years of experience in IT, and he spent the last 29 years working in information security. And now in his 23rd year of working for himself, Kevin spends his time helping his clients find their flaws in their systems, applications, and IT operations to help them uncheck the boxes that are creating a false sense of security. And he's been quoted multiple times by the Wall Street Journal and has been a guest information security expert on CNN television and CBS radio. And since 2001, Kevin has written over 1,300 articles published in various print magazines and websites. Kevin has also written 12 books on information security, including one of the all best time selling security books, Hacking for Dummies, currently in its 7th edition, as well as the Practical Guide to HIPAA privacy and security compliance. So Kevin, if you'd like to hop in here and you could take it away, and he's going to get started with his slides.
Excellent. Thanks, Kim. I really appreciate that introduction. And hello, everyone. This is going to be a great talk. Management consultant Peter Drucker once said, the only thing that's inevitable in the life of the leader is the crisis. And that's a fact. And you need to know the difference between facts and problems. So the inevitable is, if the inevitable is a fact, then how do you go about preparing for the inevitable and responding to the inevitable? Well, that's a problem. And here's the thing, you can't change facts, but you can change problems. And therein lies the opportunity in the context of incident response, especially as it relates to compliance with government regulations and whatnot. You do have control over these things, much more than you think you do. And that's why we're here today, to talk about the recent SEC cybersecurity ruling on incident disclosures and how it ties into application security. Does that sound like a good goal?
It does.
Okay, I think I hear some other rustling around. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's jump right in.
Cool.
So I don't have to tell you, there's a lot going on out there with security. You know, it seems that everyone is getting hit in some regard. When you look at it all visually, it looks like I'm not sharing the slides appropriately. I thought I had it shared. Can you see that now?
Yes, I see them now.
All right. I apologize. Technical glitch. Okay. So I don't have to tell you, there's a lot going on out there with security. It seems that everybody is getting hit in some regard. And when you look at all of it visually, you know, like what's shown in this graphic, you start to get some perspective. And now all of this is data breaches and hacks encompassing everything. But what about application security related incidents? There's a decent amount of information out there, not a ton, but a decent amount. And I found some interesting information about the Verizon data breach investigations report, the latest, the 2023 version. Basic web application attacks account for 25% of all breaches. That's huge. In fact, it's been one of the top attack vectors for the past several years, from what I recall. Over 1,400 incidents, over 1,300 with confirmed data disclosure. Threat actors, it looks like mostly 100%, and then internal and other is a much smaller percentage. But the motives are financial, espionage, fun. We all know why the bad guys do these things. This has been going on for a really long time. The data compromised, credentials, personal information, internal information, and other. So there's a lot at stake here. There's a lot going on and a lot of things that you need to protect against. Across both web applications and APIs, there are plenty of opportunities for security incidents. There's 1,000 things that can happen, but the ones that I have listed here are some of the most impactful that we are hearing about and what I'm seeing in my work. So a lot going on, especially SQL injection, user session exploitation, business logic weaknesses. I see a lot of that. Again, the credential thing, and then remote exploits, and even denial of service could be considered a web-related attack. But why are all these things happening? Well, here's what I see. It's a lack of oversight. It's letting complexity define the outcomes, meaning there's so much complexity, we don't know how to handle it all. We don't have our arms around everything. Therefore, we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know how we're going to respond. Limited or even no testing. I see a lot of applications that go untested. Lack of integration into the software development lifecycle, or just a weak SDLC. I see that quite often. Too much focus on paperwork and policies, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Inconsistent security standards, not knowing the worst case scenario and being prepared for it, not having the right people on board. Talk more about that. Giving away your power to users, vendors, and other parties. I see that a lot. These people are making security decisions on your behalf, and that's problematic. And then finally, not incorporating AppSec into incident response efforts. As Brendan Burchard said, avoidance is the best short-term strategy to escape conflict and the best long-term strategy to ensure suffering. You have to ask yourself, which side do I want to be on? On the side of application security, resilience, and proper response, or on the side of constantly putting out fires? And we know what the answer is to that. So again, that's why we're here today. And I'm guessing by now, you have at least heard of the SEC final ruling over incident disclosures. It's a pretty big deal, and of course, why we're here and what we're going to be delving into and answering your questions on. And by the way, please enter in some questions into the Q&A section, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. I may not know the answers. I may not have all the answers. I'm certainly not the smartest guy and don't know everything, but hopefully I can at least point you in the right direction. So here's the essence of what many organizations and their CISOs are up against. The Securities and Exchange Commission Cybersecurity Risk Management Strategy, Governance, and Incident Disclosure Regulation, otherwise known as the Disclosure Regulation, came about in 2022 with some origins dating back to, I believe, around 2018, maybe earlier. There's a lot to do, a lot going on. Public companies in the US, they must describe their security processes and oversight. They must disclose material incidents within 4 days. Foreign private issuers, if you fall into that category, they must describe their security processes and oversight, and then they have to furnish information on material cybersecurity incidents that they disclose or otherwise publicize in a foreign jurisdiction to any stock exchange or to security holders. And those deadlines are looming. We've got one, the first one coming up in about a month, and just right around a month. And then the next one for smaller companies is going to be in June of 2024. So right around the corner. I know everyone is scrambling with this right now. It seems to be the topic in information security and application security circles, and that's why this stuff is it's just so important, and you've got to really dig in. And speaking of digging in, here are the details. This is the essence of the regulation in terms of disclosures and requirements. It's basically being able to describe your processes for assessing, identifying, and managing risks, determining whether those risks have materially affected or are reasonably likely to materially affect their business strategy, the results of operations, or financial condition. So that's one big part of it. And then The organizations must describe the board's oversights of risks within the organization and management's role in assessing and managing those risks. And then the other big part, and this is sort of the essence of what we're talking about today, registrants must disclose incidents that they experience that is determined to be material, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and describe the aspect of it, the nature, the scope, the timing, what was the impact, what was the likely impact if you haven't confirmed it yet. All of this stuff is so fluid, especially in the middle of a breach. I've been involved with quite a few incidents and in the context of incident response, and man, everything changes. It seems like you're constantly finding new information. Every hour, something new comes up. So a lot of this is fluid, and a lot of this we're not exactly sure how it's going to work out, but we'll see soon enough through the enforcement arm of all of this. So there's 10K involvement, 8K reporting, and then 6K reporting for basically organizations that the foreign entities that have shareholders within the U.S. They've got to do, again, describe the oversight and then the role in assessing, and then talk about incidents like I previously mentioned. So don't want to get off too much into the details of that. If your organization falls under the umbrella of this, I'm sure you've already read the regulation and you're already having these discussions. What I want to talk about more is some of my perspective. We're going to get into the SolarWinds situation here in just a moment, and then talk about some solutions on how you can get better. So some insight. There's really nothing new here as it relates to security, information security as a whole, application security. We're talking about security essentials that have been around for decades. Several decades, dating back to the 1970s, likely even earlier. So none of this is really new. It's just sort of the approach and the very prescriptive requirements that the SEC has that's making it challenging for organizations. I think what we're seeing here is the emergence of teeth for enforcement. We've seen so many regulations over the years, Sarbanes-Oxley, we've seen Gramm-Leach-Bliley, HIPAA, PCI. In many cases with these big regulations that have come about, we haven't seen teeth in terms of enforcement, but now we are. And we're not sure what the total impact is going to be. And I think it's going to evolve out of that enforcement, and it's going to sort of dictate how things go moving forward. It's going to set that precedent, set the stage of, okay, well, this has happened. This is taking place. These are the consequences, and we're going to see that moving forward, not just with in the context of the SEC ruling and the context of public companies, but all companies, I think. And speaking of that, this affects public companies now, but I think we're going to see a ripple effect and most other organizations, because if you look at a lot of small organizations, including my own, I have a small consultancy, but yet I deal with big companies, a lot of public companies. They're going to have a ripple effect that's going to affect all of us, whether we're public or not. So that's another consideration. And perhaps one of the bigger challenges is that arguably most organizations are woefully unprepared for all of this. Even though we've had these best practices around for decades, arguably most of them since the 1970s, most of these concepts at least, they're still woefully unprepared. I just got off the phone with a client. He said that basically they've had to drop all strategic stuff with security. They're constantly just either putting out fires or implementing new projects, and they cannot step back and look at the bigger picture to see what to do, how to respond, how to better manage their security programs. And that's a problem. And I think when it comes to this, especially as it relates to enforcement, and even the SolarWinds situation that we're going to talk about next, There's always three sides to every story. I'm convinced of this. I've lived this in my personal life and professional life. There's three sides to every story: yours, theirs, and the truth. So all of that will eventually come out, and it's all part of this now. Information security has come into the limelight, especially with this SEC ruling, and it's a big deal. So speaking of a big deal and being unprepared, let's talk about the situation with SolarWinds. You may have heard that their CISO, Tim Brown, was recently charged with defrauding investors. This is huge, folks. And the fallout could go in so many directions. For now, I think it's going to be a positive thing, but it does beg several questions. Is this situation with SolarWinds, is it going to create a chilling effect on the CISO role? Is it going to make people want to pull back from wanting to be a CISO? Man, I've certainly heard talk of that. It certainly puts you in a bad position if you are a CISO or the CISO for your organization, or you want to become a CISO. That chilling effect, it could end up being that a lot of people end up, going elsewhere, and they just do virtual CISO work, kind of like the type of work that I do as a consultant, where there's potentially less liability involved. Who knows? So that's the first part of it. The second part is it going to provide CISOs with all of the stuff that they've been looking for the past, decade, 2 decades? Is it going to give them more buy-in? Is it going to give them more budget, more respect, and more power to get things done? These are valid considerations, and I think we're headed in this direction. I think it's going to give you more buy-in, more budget, more respect, more power, but it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time. Again, you're in the limelight. Information security, application security in this context of our conversation today is in the limelight. Only time will tell. But there's other challenges. One thing that I thought of was, who owns the risk? A lot of people, a lot of CISOs are hired to own the risk. Basically, hey, if something bad happens, that's your problem, and your head is going to roll when the trouble occurs. And we've seen that time and time again. And we may be kind of seeing it with the SolarWinds situation. I don't know for sure, but the CISO sign off on that? I would say no, likely not. As a CISO, you're in an advisory role, but advisory role to top executives who really should be owning the risk and signing off on what you say, what you're finding out, the things that you're reporting. I think this is problematic. A lot of this can be warded and stopped at the interview process. I think a lot of there could be certain CISO positions that you just don't want to take on because of what you're hearing, the vibe that you're getting during the interview process. You need to learn exactly why they are hiring for the role, and are they going to give you the support that you need, or are you just going to be an evangelist or whoever, just kind of going around beating the drum and saying that security is, everybody needs to comply and listen to what I say. That's not where you want to be. So a lot of considerations, a lot of challenges around this.
Hey, Kevin, I want to jump in if I could ask a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So in this SEC ruling, they charged that SolarWinds failed to build a robust SDL program. So what do you think is the main bar for, the minimum bar for a program to pass an investigation?
Well, there's no magical answer to this. To me, it's all about being reasonable, addressing the essentials, the basics that we're all aware of that have, again, been around forever, that low-hanging fruit that keeps getting people into trouble. This also ties into the materiality requirement. What happened, what's the impact, and so on. I think this is just as much of an ethics and procedural issue within the business as it is a technical issue. In other words, the way that security measures risks, analyzes risks, the concerns are communicated both internally and externally is huge. So it's not just a technical thing. The technical part is really the easy part, and I'll talk more about this in a minute. But on the technical side, it really boils down to understanding your risks, and putting the proper standards and policies in place, including an SDL, and then implementing the necessary technical processes and controls to see it through. Again, getting developers involved, shifting that risk upstream to maybe where it belongs. I'm not saying let's put all the weight on this on developers. That's certainly not their role, but they're certainly part of the solution. I have seen the development process being part of the problem in the past. And if something is part of the problem, then it can certainly be a part of the solution if the ways are changed.
Yeah, and then in regards to this bullet with CISOs here, with more buy-in and more budget, how do you think particular that this ruling is going to affect CISOs and their ability to gain more authority?
It's interesting. Even though I do virtual CISO work, I've never been a CISO. Don't know that I would want to be in those shoes, but mad respect for the people who are doing that work. I know it's not easy. That said, I have many colleagues and friends who are CISOs, and I've heard so many stories about how they have 100% of the accountability and yet very little authority to actually get things done. And I know those of you listening in right now, you're shaking your head or smiling, or maybe you're frowning. But I know the position that you're in. I've seen it. I've heard about it firsthand. Most CISOs I've known, they don't even report to the CEO. They're down several levels, oftentimes serving as, I hate to say this, but glorified security managers, maybe directors, but without that true visibility within the organization and the authority to get things done. So that's not where you should be. And this is a big problem. Like I mentioned before, I think this is going to, I think this is either going to have a chilling effect, or it's going to give you the ammunition that you need to get that authority you've been waiting for so long. And fingers crossed that does happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for answering those questions.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. So let's jump forward. Sun Tzu, you've heard of Sun Tzu, right? The Art of War, said that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So let me give you some key focal areas for your incident response efforts in the context of application security and the SEC's disclosure requirements. So what you see on the slide here, basically review and document oversight. How are you doing things within the organization? If you're a public company, you likely already have this in place. You may just need to flesh it out a little bit more and figure out what needs to be done. What do we need to pull in the context of the SEC requirements, anything like that. Assess your risks. And man, I see this everywhere, even in really large organizations, big companies that are public companies that still haven't properly analyzed their risks. And again, I get it. It's complicated, especially for these bigger companies with, thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of computers and the same number of employees. It's not easy. And I totally get that. Even with dozens of people on the security team, totally get it. You're still going to have to assess your risks. You're going to have to figure out what's what, at least in the context of this SEC requirement, hopefully in the context of everything eventually. And then perform tabletop exercises. I think that's a great exercise to do. It's a great thing to do, not just within IT and security circles, but get executive management, get the board members, get legal counsel, PR, anybody you can think of that works in and around incident response and get them involved in performing some tabletop exercises. Hey, here's our scenario. This is what's happened. These are the criteria. These are the questions that need to be answered. This is where we know we need to be. How do we step through all of this? And it doesn't have to take that long. It doesn't have to be that much effort. You can make a lot of progress in a 60 to 90 minute exercise, performing an incident response tabletop exercise. I've done this with clients a lot, and all it takes is an hour, maybe even less. Just the important thing is that you're keeping these things on the top of your mind, and then you're keeping them out there in the open with all of the people who need to be involved, so that they can see that, okay, yeah, so this really isn't an IT only issue, is it? Oh, really? Yeah, this isn't just a security issue. This is actually a fundamental business issue that we need to be addressing. So keep that in mind. Analyze your exposures in the context of SEC. What is it you've got to do? Where are the gaps? Where do you need to go? Knowing what you know, and then measure over time, and then learn and get better from your mistakes. And a lot of this is going to be driven by your board's appetite or tolerance for risk, especially if it's not a tech savvy board. I know one of the requirements of the SEC regulation was going to be to have someone with security expertise on the board, but that has since gone away, the way I understand it. It still helps to have some tech savvy, security savvy folks on the board, asking the tough questions, making sure that these things are happening. And don't get me wrong, with these 5 things that I have listed here, these are not in place just to cover your butt. These are what I consider to be common sense security practices that you probably already have in place. You just need to fine tune them. And one more thing, as a CISO, you may consider developing a relationship with a tech savvy attorney for your own personal protection, possibly even have them on retainer, just to make sure that you can properly respond. Now that we know what has happened with the SolarWinds situation, may not be a bad idea. So a few more items. Are you doing the right things? Are you working with legal to demonstrate that you're doing what you know needs to be done and what the SEC says you have to do? Work with legal. I cannot stress this enough. I cannot tell you how many organizations that I consult with, including very large public companies, that are trying to take on things like this within IT and security without getting executive management involved, legal involved, their security committee. That is setting yourself up for failure. So be really careful with that. Understanding what material means. Have you gotten together with legal to basically document that? Which it's likely going to be an incident that jeopardizes some aspect of trust or even the integrity of your systems and the information that you're processing. And is it worthy? Is it material? Is it worthy of reporting on? And this is a gray area of this regulation, and I suspect people are going to drag things out. I suspect we're going to see, well, we didn't think it was material, but oh yeah, the SEC determined that it was. Now what do we do? There's a lot of stuff around that. Again, this is a legal challenge, and make sure that legal counsel is on board. Another one of the right things that you can do is mastering the basics. I'm a big advocate of finding and fixing the 20% of the security flaws that are creating 80% of your risks. And it's almost always the basics. It's secure coding, it's patching, visibility, passwords, all of the simple stuff that we've tried to get our arms around forever. But it's still challenging, and I totally get it. And again, I don't envy you. And then, are you truly like just managing incident response, or is it just a sheet of paper that you have sitting off to the side? Yeah, here's our plan. If anything ever happens, I'll pull out the sheet of paper and I'll read what we need to do. That's not where you need to be. you know that, and if you're on this webinar, especially in a CISO role, you've been doing this long enough to know that it's all about management and oversight and tweaking and fine-tuning that oscillation over time. If you can think about, I like to use this analogy. I used to use it when I was racing cars. I learned it from a gentleman, Ross Bentley, very famous driving instructor. He talked about when you're racing, you want to fine-tune the oscillation of making mistakes. When you make a big mistake, when you go off the track, it's big oscillation on, if you have X and Y axes, that oscillation is really big spikes. But the better you get and the more you fine tune your steering input, your braking, your throttle application, your racecraft, all of that stuff. And likewise with security, the better you get with your tools, your processes, your whatever, your people, you fine tune that oscillation so you don't really have those spikes across that axis. They're little, but they're negligible, and they're not going to bring you down. That's what managing incident response is all about. So what are your next steps? Here's what I think you need to do. I've already covered some of this, but I want to reiterate it. Sit down and figure out what are our specific requirements, what needs to be accomplished in the context of application security. You may be surprised. There's a lot going on with that, just in application security alone. Are we being intentional and focusing on the things that matter? Are we meeting the requirements, and how do we know if we're meeting the requirements? Who else needs to be involved? Maybe you need to bring legal counsel in. You definitely need to bring legal counsel in. Maybe you need to bring in an outside expert. Maybe you need to bring in some vendors with some new products to help you with this. What else can be done at the board level to ensure compliance? Do you need to get more people, the right people on board? You need to have more buy-in. There's so many factors, but what can be done at the highest level of the organization to ensure compliance with this? And then you might consider, if you are a private company or you deal with private companies and the conversation is going to come up, how are private companies going to be impacted? They're not necessarily subject to the regulations, but they will experience a trickle-down effect, like I mentioned before. A lot of this is all about your incident response plan. It's about how you're going to be able to hit the ground running once a security event occurs. Real quick, here's a basic template of what I believe makes up an effective incident response plan. It has all of these items: overview, roles, responsibilities, incidents requiring action, which is really big. Most people don't have that in their plan. And then all the specific steps about detecting, investigating, containing, eradicating, recovery, follow-up. And then, of course, probably one of the bigger pieces of this that could fall under the follow-up section, maybe even have its own item, is the reporting requirements. What are our reporting requirements? Make sure you have fully flushed out your incident response plan and made the appropriate adjustments to meet the SEC requirements. You wouldn't believe how many organizations I see that don't have an incident response plan, including big public companies, or they have one and they haven't done much with it. So having said that about incident response plans, you have to be careful. You can have the most well-documented incident response plan, security policies, overall security plan, whatever. But at the end of the day, none of it means hardly anything unless and until you take the steps necessary to get things under control. And one last thing related to this, I often see application security programs that are run separately from overall information security programs. So that means that AppSec often doesn't fall under the umbrella of policy enforcement, incident response, overall risk oversight. If your company falls within the scope of the SEC enforcement, or you just want to follow along and maybe do the right thing so you can use it as a competitive advantage, you may have to make some changes to your overall security program to make sure that application security is a fully functioning component under that umbrella. Really important part of it. And you can look at any of the major government and industry regulations, and they all reference having the proper oversight, which is not referring to the quote unquote IT department or the security team, nor is the responsibility placed on outside parties or whomever. It's the security committee and the business at large, including legal counsel, including the board of directors, everybody. So this means that you have to get all the right people on board. There needs to be, of course, executive management involvement, legal involvement, PR involvement. There's going to be operations, customer service, help desk. There's going to be a lot of people that need to be involved in this process. And all of this, I know we've covered a lot. This is a complicated topic that we've kind of compressed into a 20, 30-minute conversation, but this all boils down to how you respond. The interesting thing about security incidents is that the focus is going to be on you, the CISO or whomever it is in charge of security. You may not want that, but that's reality. It's a fact. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can't change facts. The Greek philosopher Epictetus, he said, circumstances don't make the man, they only reveal him to himself and to others in the case of security incidents. So the only thing management, your peers, your users, the SEC are going to care about is what you're doing and how you respond to incidents when they arise. So everyone around you is going to frame their opinion of you, judge you, and interact with you based on how you handle these situations. So again, which side of the coin do you want to be on? You have to ask yourself it, and it all comes back to your responsibility. So a couple of resources for you here. NIST has a great guide on developing incident response plans and just handling incidents overall. ISO has an actual framework around that as well. You can Google my name and incident response and find out more about incident response capabilities. I've also written a ton on application security, but just in the context of incident response, Google me, or you can go to my website, principallogic.com. I have a specific page. I call it haironfire.html. And no, that's not what happened to me. I just lost all of mine, but it's I named that after what I usually witness. Everybody's running around like their hair's on fire and they don't know what to do when an incident occurs. As we wind down, I want to share a few more resources for you. Then we're going to take some questions, and then we'll close out. Check out my website, my resources page, my blog, my latest books. Hacking for Dummies, 7th edition, just came out last year. I'd love it if you would reach out to me on LinkedIn. I always love connecting with new people. Please reach out to me. Love the new connections and being able to learn and get some fresh perspectives. One more thing. I've written quite a few articles for Probly. If you go to their website at probly.com, they have a blog link. You can see I have a specific page where all my blogs are listed. And I'm actually going to be following up this webinar with a blog article or blog piece on this subject. So be sure to check that out. Okay. I'll leave you with this, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. Jim Rohn said that failure is not a single cataclysmic event. You don't fail overnight. Instead, failure is a few errors in judgment repeated every day. Folks, you have to expect the expected. Stuff is going to happen. Breaches are going to occur. If there's anything you take from this, it's that you cannot respond to the things that you don't acknowledge. So you have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing going to be defensible in the event of an incident or a breach and the SEC gets involved? A lot of security incidents and pretty much all breaches end up on the desks of lawyers. So this is one of the most important things to consider as it relates to security. Are your board of directors and legal counsel willing to defend what you're doing? Do you have the authority that you really need? How is an opposing lawyer or the SEC going to look at what you're doing and pick it apart and make your business and you personally look bad? There's an old saying that everything is easy with the benefit of hindsight, or experience is something you don't get until just after you need it. Yeah, keep that in mind here. There are things that you can do. Expect the expected. There's always more that can be done. There's always more fine-tuning, tweaking, minimizing the spikes in that oscillation. of all the events that you have going on. And it's up to you in part to make things happen. So with that, Kim, I'll turn it back over to you for the Q&A, and we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, let's go ahead and jump into some questions. We've just got a few as we wrap up. First one is, what verbiage should I add to my IRP to address this requirement?
Oh, man. It's going to depend on what you already have, what legal counsel comes up with. Obviously, there's the 4-day component, 4-day requirement for disclosures after materiality has been established. So you want to document those two: the 4-day requirement, the materiality. I need to find a better way to say that. It's tripping me up. Those two things alone are probably the biggest things. Even your roles and responsibilities, you may need to tweak that. Even how you're going to, again, you should have a section on reporting. Make sure that you're talking about that. Make sure that you you have procedures and plans to, okay, if something happens, this is what we're going to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the steps that we're going to follow. Because again, you don't want to have to wing it like so many organizations do. Yeah, that I would say that's the essence of it. But if you step back, look at the bigger picture, get a handle on what's required, where you're currently at, and where you know you need to be. I think you'll be able to find out exactly what needs to be added.
Right. Cool. One more question here that I'm going to hand over your way. So, specific to credential vulnerabilities in web apps, can you share how these are comprised in greater detail? Credentials you mentioned accounted for 86% of overall risk to web apps.
Yeah, that's you. Can you repeat the first part of that?
Sure. So, specific to credential vulnerabilities in web apps, can you share how these are comprised in greater detail?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the situations that we're seeing here. It's not necessarily a web application vulnerability. It's a vulnerability of the endpoints, malware getting on systems where these credentials are being harvested. It could be a big data breach that involves actual databases where credentials are located. It could be an application itself. There could be SQL injection. It could be something somewhere within the application environment where these credentials are stored and can therefore be harvested. So it can come from a lot of different angles. I think the important thing is to look. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it's, as we saw in the Verizon report, it's 80-something% of 25% total overall vulnerabilities. And that's huge. That's a lot, just credentials alone. So make sure you're using the right tools, looking in the right areas through your web vulnerability and penetration testing, your applications and your APIs. A lot of people forget about their APIs, but arguably those are just as important, if not more important, and can be exploited in just the same ways. Often more easily because they're not being monitored. So yeah, I think that answers the question.
For sure. We've just got one more really quickly. Are you finding that more law firms or a group of their employees in their firm are specializing in cyber defense?
Yeah, I actually work with some law firms. Am I finding that they're specializing more in the defense of that? Yes, they are, and for good reason. Law firms are arguably one of the most vulnerable entities out there, and they're one of the most commonly attacked entities, not just because they can be outdated. They tend to be outdated, running older systems, not necessarily having the budget to do IT and security the right ways. Those are problems, but the real challenge is that law firms are really like banks back when, people would go to the banks and, handle paper money transactions, because that's where the money is within the banks. Well, guess where all of the information is? It's within these law firms. It's huge. The law firms themselves are dealing with extremely sensitive information, intellectual property. For the most part, there is often sensitive personal information involved, but it's a lot of intellectual property, a lot to lose, a lot to be gained by the bad guys. That's why they're the target, and for good reason. So you've got to, if you are with a law firm, I would say for sure try to build out your defenses. Even if you're not a public company, and you're probably not, but you deal with a lot of public companies like I do. Do what you can to follow along with these SEC requirements, so that you can, if something happens, you can again hit the ground running and help them along the way, and help your firm along the way as well.
Beautifully said. Thank you. And that looks like that is the end of the questions that I have in here. Wrapping it up, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excellent insights on this topic. Make sure to go ahead and give Kevin a follow on LinkedIn. We can stay in touch, and check out Kevin's guest articles on the Probly website to keep informed. Kevin, thank you so much, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks, Kim. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.